Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the show. This week I brought on Massine Bouzerar. It's the second time he's been on the Touch MBA podcast. The first time I spoke to him, we discussed his application process and journey to Insead. That's episode number 128. So if you're looking for application tips to Insead, definitely check out that episode. At the end of that show, I made him promise me publicly that he'd come back on after his Insead journey. And I'm so glad that he reached out to me and that we had this chat. He's a man true to his word. In this episode, we talk about how Massine landed his consulting gig. He'll be working at Bain Company in Brussels. And we also talk about his recruiting process at Insead and how he just took advantage of that 10-month window, right, to have an amazing, not only academic experience, but social experience as well. So I hope this episode gives you a really good feeling for what life is like at Insead. And if you need help with school selection, as Massine did back in 2017, if you're looking for some ways to strengthen your profile before you apply, go head over to touchmba.com. We'd be happy to give you some free help there. And you can also find lots of free guides and, of course, all our podcast episodes. So go check all of that out at touchmba.com. Hope to see some of you over there. And let's get straight to my chat with Massine. Massine, welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. What does it feel like to be an Insead MBA grad?
It feels great, and thanks for having me back. It's great to chat with you again.
I mean, can you believe it's gone by so fast, like a flash?
Yeah,
it's incredible.
You're telling me.
Yeah. So, and you were just in Central America. Where did you go on your trip?
So I spent the summer traveling from Panama all the way to Guatemala and every country in between. So, trying to make the most of my time before I got to start work.
Yes.
And go back to reality.
Yes. So, gosh, when we last spoke, could I call you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? Is that
Yeah.
the right description?
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair assessment.
So, yeah, we recorded an episode that I'll link to in the show notes about how Massine applied to Insead. And we recorded that right before you started the program. And now we're doing a recap of your journey. And I thought a good way to organize our talk would be to organize, our chat into two boxes. The first would be landing a management consulting role or job at Insead, after Insead, because I'm sure so many people thinking about Insead associate that with management consulting. And I'd also like to get your thoughts on, what the recruiting process is like in general for you and your classmates. And then combine that with the second box, which is, how do I land my dream job, land the job I want, but also do this in the context of having an amazing life experience, right? Because I remember when I spoke to you last, you were in Canada. You're really looking forward to living and studying in Europe. And yeah, I mean, academics and recruiting is great, but you're also in France and you get this chance to explore that part of the world and do everything you can during your 10 months over there at Insead. So I'd like to talk about combining those two things, but maybe we could first start with the recruiting process at Insead, specifically for management consulting. So I'm just going to give you the floor for the first question. What are your big picture thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I can give a bit of an outline in terms of how that works from a timing perspective. So I'm graduating as a 19J, which means that I didn't have the summer off to do an internship or anything like that. So it means that you don't really start interviewing or really interacting a lot with the consulting firms on campus until P4, which would be March and April. So like kind of near the end of the program. And before that, you do get opportunities to go for coffee chats and meet various consultants, but it really doesn't start heating up until then. So the nice thing about that is you do have, I'd say, half the program where you can, enjoy life in France or in Singapore, travel, get to know your classmates before things really start heating up. At Insead, I think you just alluded to it. I mean, it's a very popular consulting school, I would say. I think now looking on LinkedIn at most of my classmates and what they're doing, post MBA, a lot of them do end up in consulting. And I think makes consulting so attractive to an Insead MBA is the fact that they recruit all over the world. So if you're looking to change geography, do something totally different after the program, I think those large consulting firms make it very easy, or at least easier, to do that. So that would be consulting in a nutshell. I mean, I could go a million different directions here and double click on any of those. But yeah, that's essentially a high level view of recruiting at Insead for consulting.
Do any of your classmates find it stressful, in graduating in the 19J or the J class, right? That this is actually at the end of the process. So it's almost like, yeah, you get to enjoy your time, but it's also stressful that recruiting happens months before you graduate.
Yeah, and I think it's a trade-off between the two classes. So if you're a J like me, you get to benefit from enjoying the program longer without having to worry about recruiting. But at the end of the day, you only get this one, recruiting window for consulting or other, big types of companies that come on campus. On the reverse, if you're a D, so graduating in December, you actually get 2 shots at recruiting. So you recruit for the summer internship, and then you recruit full-time. And then if you're successful in summer internship, you don't necessarily need to recruit full-time. But the tough thing there is that right when you get on campus, you kind of have to be ready for interviews. You have about 2 months until firms will start interviewing you, which means a lot of the preparation needs to be done before you join the program. And you kind of have to hit the ground running. So, I mean, for me, things worked out. So I'm very happy I was a J because I kind of got, a job and then the best of, enjoying life at Insead. But I think ultimately when you apply to the program, that's something that you need to be aware of. So whether you want the 2 windows or you're going to focus on the one recruiting window and enjoy the program.
Well, we should actually just make it clear. What will you be doing in a couple weeks, Massine?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. So I'll be joining Bain Company in Brussels as a consultant.
Wow. And all right. So when I think about, going to Insead, and I mean, it's such a huge program, 2 different classes, a lot of students each year, and so many of them are trying to move into management consulting. I think about 50%, right, go into consulting each year, whether those people are staying in the industry or switching to the industry. My question is, how can you differentiate yourself from not only your classmates, but, just all the talented MBAs in general vying for these positions that are, very prestigious in the MBA world?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of, us really spend a lot of time thinking about that. I think ultimately there's no shortcut to it. There's no one thing that they're all looking for or that one thing that you have that will set you apart from, everyone else. I think it's about really putting some thought behind, which firms are you particularly interested in and what offices within those firms do you want to work at? Because working in Dubai, for example, is very different from working in London in terms of the industries that they serve and the types of backgrounds that they look for. So if you're an oil and gas professional and you have a lot of experience in that and you want to go back to that, I think you're probably going to be a way better fit in Dubai than in London, where they probably don't do very much oil and gas. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing you need to realize up front is, if you're completely flexible geography-wise, maybe align yourself to firms and offices that kind of suit either what you did before the MBA or what you want to do next. And I think the rest is all, generic things that the firms look for. They look for people who are smart, ambitious, work hard, are friendly, outgoing, someone that they would want to work with every day. But yeah, I would say don't stress too much about the little things. Just kind of have a strategy going into it.
Do they even care about your GMAT score?
I I can't speak on behalf of Bain or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But from my experience, I don't think that they cared. I think in one interview they joked around about my GMAT, but it was, we were just joking around about it. But I really don't think that this is something that they prioritize. I think if you made it to a top MBA program, they know that you're smart and they're going to look at other things. They're going to kind of steer away from the academic and try to understand who you are as a person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about your year at Insead. I mean, I remember from our last podcast, you were thinking about using technology or entering technology in the developing world, perhaps, or moving into consulting. Were you tempted to look at other potential industries and functions aside from consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say you're right in that going into Insead, my plan wasn't 100% set on consulting. And I was still very much interested in either, joining a big tech company or an NGO that's doing very interesting things around the world. And I still recruited for, tech and NGOs while at Insead, but it is definitely more structured to go through the consulting recruitment pipeline. So I think, you know exactly when they're coming on campus, who's coming, what offices are hiring, and you get an offer pretty quickly if you're successful. So when I thought about my post-MBA goals, and my long-term goals are still very much focused on combining social impact and technology, but immediately after Insead, the biggest thing I wanted out of the program is that geographic mobility. And that's what the consulting firms really offered to students like me, is this ability to work somewhere else in the world and still build your skills and develop those before you're ready to do something perhaps a little bit different. So my plan of attack, because consulting recruiting it takes a lot of work. You have to do a lot of cases, you have to do a lot of prep. So I thought I'd focus 100% on that. If I wasn't successful, then I have enough time to recruit elsewhere.
Yeah, interesting.
So that was my plan. And I think a lot of my classmates had a similar strategy in terms of focusing solely on recruiting for consulting. And if that didn't work, then they had a lot of other things kind of like lined up as like the next set of opportunities they wanted to look at.
You mentioned having this focus on what firms you're interested in and which offices you're most interested in when you're thinking about consulting. And I'm just curious what the picture is like on the ground with Brexit going on and how kind of visas work in France. I mean, I heard that a lot of students get placed in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And I'm just curious, what is that like as someone not from Europe trying to get a job in Europe such as yourself?
Yeah, so I can touch on Brexit. I think at least during my time at Insead, it didn't really seem to influence hiring. I think the only industry that was maybe an exception was investment banking. So we noticed that for IB jobs in Europe, they were they were still hiring in London, but they were hiring more in Paris, for example, just like as a hedging strategy. In terms of like the overall European job market, I think if you're recruiting for consulting, generally, visa won't be an issue, at least with the big firms. You apply where you want to work. And then if you're successful, then they go ahead and sponsor. There are a few exceptions. I think Switzerland, for example, I think is a little bit more complicated to get a visa. And I think some firms kind of encouraged applicants to apply elsewhere. I'm trying to think of another example for you. I think Singapore was getting a little bit more difficult as well, because I think there's a cap on the number of individuals companies can sponsor. But again, I have friends who are going to work for big consulting firms in Singapore who are not Singaporean. So I think there's always exceptions. Yeah, and I think in terms of where people are going, I think, so Insead is a huge program, but when you start counting the number of people going to each firm, to each office, I mean, it's still small numbers. So I think, for example, I'm going to Brussels, and I think that's probably one of the larger, they hired probably the most people compared to other offices around the world. And it's still 3 people who are starting in Brussels. So you'll kind of see that people get sprinkled kind of all over the world as part of this hiring funnel.
And are you guys all in touch, like all the Insead grads that ended up getting into Bain or going to Bain, and all the Insead alums who are in Bain? Is there like some group that connects you all?
So we have WhatsApp groups for my class. And we broke that up by geography and by industry as well. So we don't have a Bain Belgium WhatsApp group yet. I have a feeling it's probably going to, come up at some point. But for example, we have everyone that's working in Western Europe in consulting as like a group, which makes it really easy for people to connect. And I think as part of the job, you travel so much that it makes sense to kind of have like a Western Europe group where, we're all going to be flying city to city. It'll be easy to meet up in that way.
I mean, and why were you interested in Brussels?
So I speak French. It's my first language. And my family is now predominantly based in Europe. So my sister's in Paris. My mom is in Algeria. So in terms of geographic location, it kind of checked off a few boxes. I wanted to live somewhere French speaking for a little bit longer, and I wanted to be closer to family. So it was essentially going to be Paris, Geneva, or Brussels. And I've been to Brussels a few times. I really like this city. And I think the other big factor that will come up is the people that you meet at a particular firm. So I only applied to Bain Brussels. Like that was the only firm I applied to that was like for opportunities in Brussels. And it was partially due to the people I met and the kind of work that they do there. It seemed like a really good fit. And so that's how I kind of prioritize Belgium.
Can I ask how you met them? Because clearly you were doing your research trying to meet people from the different firms, right? In the different cities. Was that through school-sponsored events, or was that really you just doing the legwork? How does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, Insead makes it very easy, I think, to connect with the offices that you're interested in. So even though they come, once a year for the J class to fully recruit, they still make their way on campus a few times a year for coffee chats, or should they share their contact information well in advance with a list of offices that they're hiring from. So for me, I had a coffee chat with a manager from the London office. And when I expressed my interest in working in Belgium, he immediately connected me with the recruiter from that office. And then, it was fairly simple. I think you obviously have to go to the coffee chats and put in that kind of work. But ultimately, I thought it was very simple. And they're very open to the idea of meeting you well ahead of interviews, because ultimately it helps you figure out which office you want to work out of. And also on their end, it helps them get to know you through multiple interactions rather than the 2 interview rounds that they're allowed to give you.
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, I would like to kind of dive in there in terms of the actual process and preparation. What do you think, looking back, was really helpful for you? You mentioned, practicing those cases repeatedly, clearly meeting people. But yeah, what do you think were the key kind of success factors for you in preparing as someone from a non-management consulting background, right, to jump into that industry?
Yeah, so I'd say there's probably 2 things that I would say were very important. The first one being networking, and then the second being the actual case preparation. Let me start with the case preparation. I think what I did that was good there is, instead of kind of cramming it all into 1 month or 2 months, which a lot of my classmates did do and were successful, but I kind of like only did maybe 1 or 2 cases a week over a longer period of time, so that by the time recruiting came up, I was fairly confident about how my cases would go in an interview, and I could focus on other things like my cover letters or sending thank you emails to people I had met. So I'd say I invest the time earlier on, especially if you want to enter the consulting industry. Just maybe start 4 months before interviews and just do a case a week. It's really not too much of your time, and then it's really going to do wonders by the time that you're ready for interviews. And then the second one was networking. And I don't think networking will land you the job per se, but the same way I networked with Insead alumni when I was applying, what that did for me is just, it helped me understand the culture of the school, and it helped me prioritize that school. So I'd say through networking, you get to meet people from so many offices who do a lot of very interesting things within the firm. And that helps you understand the small differences between these big consulting firms, but also, which locations would be a better fit for you. And I think if you do that, it just makes it very easy to select offices at the end.
Yeah. And do you think going through classes for half a year at Insead also helped you prep? I mean, I would think that would seem to give you an advantage, right? That you're going through business school for 6 months, like super intense academic setting.
Yeah, and I think that does help, especially classes like strategy, where you learn a lot of different frameworks. Because in a case interview, it all starts with a framework. So I think you get a bit of an edge there. But also you have 6 months of interacting with classmates who are ex-consultants or current consultants. You build a network, and it's not as awkward to ask them for case practice, right? So I was very, very comfortable asking my peers for help, especially 5-6 months into the process.
And you found it collaborative? I mean, I know I'm putting you on the spot on a public podcast, but like the culture of recruiting, because I could see how it could go both ways, right?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's actually where I was very pleasantly surprised, is that people weren't competitive in an unhealthy way. Like people weren't cutthroat. People didn't try to push you out of the way. I think a reason why people were so helpful is that a lot of the times you're all applying to completely different offices or completely different firms. So the overlap is like pretty small, but also I think it's just part of the Insead culture. I mean, I remember doing cases with classmates who were applying for the exact same firm and the exact same offices that I was, but that didn't matter. You kind of put that aside, and we genuinely wanted the other to get better. And we would give each other very good feedback so that you would get better. And I think ultimately that's the right way to do it, because your first job post MBA isn't going to be like your big, most important job. I think like you have like a long career ahead of you, and these are the people who are going to help you flourish in your career. So I think that's part of building the Insead network is helping each other while you're students, but also afterwards.
Yeah, having that longer term vision, right, in terms of what you want to do. And I'm curious, like, what the relationship is between the big three, right? McKinsey, Bain, BCG. I believe McKinsey sends most people to Insead sends the most graduates to McKinsey, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
out of like other MBA programs,
but also within those top three consulting firms.
Yes.
So
yes.
Why is that?
Well, I think so. The big three, Insead is like their biggest, it's where they get most of their talent globally. And I think it's going to be the same reasons for all three of them. It's because you can come to Insead and hire for your Paris office, your Shanghai office, your Tokyo office, your Sydney office. So I think like there's very few schools in the world where you can do that, right? When you go to a US school, for example, you're primarily hiring for the US. Probably 90% of the hires will be for the US. And then there's like a 10% for Canada, Europe, etc. So I think these firms like Insead, particularly for that reason, I mean, if you think about it, it's a very cost-effective way to find talent. You go to one place and you come out of it hiring, 100 different people for, 80 different offices around the world. And I think the other piece is also around the students at Insead who are generally very open-minded. People have worked in different places around the world or in different industries. So I think you find people there who are very keen to try out consulting as the next opportunity.
And this kind of bleeds into the second box I mentioned at the beginning of the show, but you mentioned that you were very active, that you had leadership positions, right, in the technology, media, telecom, a student club, as well as the consulting club. And I'm wondering what role that played in your recruiting, in your education process.
Yeah. So what I would say, just upfront, get involved in the clubs that you think are a good fit for you, or you want to learn from, or you have the most to give back to. I don't think having a leadership role in any club is going to help you get a job, to be honest. I'll be very frank.
Love that. Yeah.
Because I think some people do it for the wrong reasons, but I think at Insead, most people do it for the right reasons. So only do it if it's something that you're passionate about. So during my experience in the program, I was president of Outsead, which is the LGBT student club. And then I was involved in the consulting club and the TMT clubs as well. Another piece of advice there is if you have a leadership position in one club, I think that's already going to be a lot of work. So I'd say focus on one club as like a president or a vice president, and then just get involved with the other ones as more of like a passive member. So that was essentially what I did. I got involved in all the events that the consulting club and the TMT clubs are running, but I focused kind of like all of my efforts and my spare time on developing Outsead as a student club. But honestly, yeah, I don't think me being president of Outsead necessarily came up that much in interviews or at all. And it's not gonna be what gets you the job, right? So you have to do it because it's something you want to do with getting nothing back in return.
No, absolutely. And what about, I just have one more question on this, on the consulting, on recruiting process. Like your classmates who say they weren't able to land a gig with McKinsey, Bain, or BCG, maybe they were targeting smaller, more boutique consulting firms or even outside management consulting. Was it tough for them to go through that recruiting process because maybe it wasn't as well structured? I mean, from your experience, it sounds like almost seamless, the way that the program is structured to put you in touch with the right people.
Yeah, so I think any large firm, you benefit from a very structured process where they come on campus to do all the interviews. But I'd say a lot of my classmates are going to work for firms that necessarily didn't show up on campus, didn't do interviews on campus. And I think the toughest thing there is that the onus is a bit on you. You always have the support of the career office at the school, but it's up to you to reach out to Insead alumni in those companies or, apply on like a job portal that's not necessarily on the Insead website. So it does take a bit of legwork, but I'd say that's not so different from, pre-Insead when you were navigating your career. It's just what's different now is that you get access to really great resources on campus and you get access to the alumni network before you even graduate. So I think it does add some stress, but I'd say a lot of people go that route. I don't think, even though 50% of us end up in consulting, I think the rest, I would say, had that type of experience and it works out in the end.
And you didn't see much of a difference between the J&D terms there on that side of things?
No,
yeah.
I wouldn't think so. Because I think ultimately the structured hires, so like consulting, investment banking, in terms of absolute numbers between the J and the D class are pretty much identical. It's just the way it works out for the D class is that, maybe 25% of their hires are made as a summer intern that's then converted as a full-time. And then the other 75 just comes up through like the last wave of recruiting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what did I miss, Massine? Did I miss any questions here?
For recruiting.
Should I be asking something that, like that? Yeah. Just curious.
I could just add on a point, just something interesting that I saw at Insead is, it has a reputation to be this like really big consulting school, but then your first couple of months, no one is interested in consulting.
Wow.
People are talking about other career options that they're looking at, but it's interesting the way you see people convert over to consulting once the companies make it on campus and they talk about the amazing work that they do. So I'd say, as an applicant, let's say you're considering Insead, like just be prepared for that. And if you're really sure you don't want to do consulting, stick to your guns. Don't have the FOMO that everyone talks about. And some people did, and that's great. But then also at the same time, be open-minded because you might not actually understand what those consulting firms actually do for work. And then once you learn about it, all of a sudden you might think that it's actually a really good fit for what you want to do.
Got it. Let's use that to jump into the second part of our talk. FOMO. How do you deal with FOMO when you're at this amazing MBA program? You have 10 months to make the most of it, to meet the most people, to land your job, to, learn as much as you can. I'm wondering if you had a strategy or a philosophy going into the program and whether that worked for you, whether that changed, whether you think it should have been something else.
Yeah, I mean, FOMO is something we talk about all the time at Insead. And I think it's probably a function of the program being so short. But you honestly feel like you have to maximize every moment. Like that, you want to get value out of every moment. You want to go to every party. You want to join every club. You want to go on every trek. But it's physically impossible to do all these things because they all overlap. And you're going to want to get some sleep as well during the 10 months at Insead. I think well, at least I'm speaking from my experience, when I first started out, I very much had that mindset. I wanted to do everything. I went to every party every night. But then there comes a point where you start burning out and you have to start prioritizing what's important to you. So you start prioritizing things like, recruiting a little bit later, but also whether or not you want to focus on academics, whether you want to focus on, these 3 student clubs versus all 20 of them, or focusing on treks, etc. So I think I never actually sat down to write down the things that I wanted to focus on. It was always very spontaneous. But I remember there being a turn where I wanted to kind of only focus on the things that were important to me. So rather than going to every party where, all 300 people would show up, I chose to focus on deepening the relationships I had with, the people I met at the beginning. And I think that was a wise decision. And these are people I'm going to be friends with probably for life. But I think it's just like a natural process all NCATers go through. You start out and you're crazy and you do everything. And eventually you burn out and you start, really focusing on the handful of things that matter to you. And that's totally normal. And everyone will go through that.
Yeah. You mentioned that you felt it was you're glad that you deepened the relationships with people you met at the beginning. How did you meet those people? Was it through interest groups or was it through your section or, yeah. Or was it just a kind of like organic meeting of similar or interesting people that you were interested in?
Yeah. So I met people through a bunch of different ways. One of my closest friends, we actually just lived in the same building.
Yeah.
So
just proximity.
That's how we met.
Yeah.
And exactly. Then you'll meet a lot of people through your section. So I think a lot of the people I know very well in the program are through my section, but also sometimes you'll meet people through treks. So I met a really good friend of mine in January. We did a course where we actually went to South Africa as like a pro bono consulting project. And over our time in South Africa, we grew very close. And then now we're very, very, very good friends. So I think there's no like one way you'll meet everyone. You'll go on a trek, you'll join a particular club, or you live very close to someone and you walk to school every day. So I think those are the different ways you're going to kind of like find your people at Insead.
Yeah, because you mentioned, whether to focus on academics was one of your questions. And I know you mentioned that you were an academic rep, right, for your class. That's something we haven't really covered on the show. So could you talk a little bit more about like what that entails and kind of what you got out of it?
Yeah, of course. So at the beginning of the program, each section has to elect 2 academic reps, 2 student life reps, I think an IT rep and a communication rep, and a career rep. So you essentially have these like reps that will represent your section on various topics. So, when that first came up, obviously, my FOMO alarm started going on. I was like, I'd really like one of these opportunities. It'd be cool to meet people from other sections because you get to work with them a lot. And I was a teaching assistant when I was younger, when I was in university. So for me, academic reps seemed like a good fit. So I just kind of like went for it. I didn't really think too much into it. You just like put your name down and then your section votes. So I guess I was voted class nerd by my class, even though they had only known me for a week. So I don't know if that's a good thing, but it's a good opportunity. And what the academic rep mostly dealt with was just providing feedback to the professors based on what the class is saying. So things like, is the workload too heavy? Do we do enough examples in class? Can we push out an assignment because it conflicts with other classes or a particular track? It was mostly that type of thing, which to me was a really good experience. And it was a way of getting to know the professors outside of class as well.
Yeah. And how is the relationship between students and professors at Insead?
I think it was very good. A lot of professors just had complete open door policies. You could grab a coffee or a drink with them very easily. And I mean, a ton of people at the end of every class would kind of like line up to the front to ask questions. So I thought the relationship was really good, and they make themselves available outside of class hours for any questions that you have. So I thought, I think it was great, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, and as the academic rep, did you feel like the workload was too heavy, or could have made heavier? Like that's kind of a tricky spot, isn't it? Like maybe your class,
it is, yeah.
Your classmates are like, yeah, academics, they probably want the professors to know something else than what it is. So yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, P1 and P2, so the first 4 months of Insead are absolutely nuts. Like you have way too many classes. I remember in P1 especially, we had classes like almost every Saturday. So I think that's marketed pretty well as well. Like they tell you that the program can be very intense, but especially so at the beginning. So the workload did feel kind of out of control at times, but ultimately that was just how the learning was going to take place. I mean, and it's also part of getting over FOMO. You have just so much stuff to do academically alone that you already have to prioritize between classes. And just a little piece of advice, if you have the chance to write those exemption exams at the beginning, definitely write them because just having 1 or 2 fewer courses during that time will make your life so much easier. So I'd say, the beginning of the program is hectic, but it does start quieting down a bit near the end, especially when you're supposed to focus on recruiting. So I had more than enough time, to do interviews and practice cases when that time came, but you will find it difficult at the beginning.
I mean, I know you would never say this but you did finish top 10% of your class. And I'm wondering how challenging you found the academics at Insead. I mean, clearly it was overwhelming at times, but yeah, I'm just wondering from the pure just learning side of it, what your experience was and what did you get the most from there?
Yeah, so I'd say it totally depends on what background you come from. So I did my undergrad in finance. So I was able to reinvest the time that I would have spent on my finance classes at Insead on the courses I found a lot more challenging. So I think overall, it was a lot of work. Like no matter how smart you think you are, I think it's about just getting down and putting in the hours for the exams and the assignments. Trying to think of some of my more challenging courses. So we had a course called Process Operations Management, POM.
Yeah.
I actually don't know what it stands for, but that one was particularly difficult, especially the exam. I think the exam was like 40 pages long. I think it was basically written so that you don't finish it.
Jeez.
Yeah, but so I think everyone is going to find something easier or harder based on what your background is. But I mean, just reading all the cases every week alone, it just takes up so much time that it's hard to have a light schedule, especially with the academics at the beginning.
I mean, did you find it difficult to work with people from all over the world? I mean, that's a big selling point for the program, right? That you always hear the stories, like each group, it's, everyone's from a different country and from a different industry. And you have to get through some thorny issues sometimes as people have competing priorities during that time and different levels of expertise, right, in that subject.
Yeah, I think that's honestly part of the fun at Insead.
Okay.
I mean, I experienced some of that in my study group. I think overall, our experience was actually, I think, very, very good compared to some of the other stories we'd heard. But already you kind of see yourself, I never thought I would behave in certain ways until you're in that scenario. But also you start unconsciously building alliances with people who are similar to you. Not alliances like Survivor or any of those TV shows, but for example, there was an American in my study group and we just naturally found ourselves thinking the same way or agreeing on similar things. But that's because the rest of the group was so heterogeneous. So it's these little things that you've never experienced in your life because, I've worked in Canada and generally we're all, I never thought I'd say this, but we think in a very homogeneous way compared to going to Insead and you meet someone that's from India, someone that's from China, someone that's from Italy. And so it's so interesting because the learning you get from that alone is so valuable. But I think the process is like even more important than the results. So I think let's say you're starting Insead soon, like enjoy your time with your study group. Don't focus too much on like what the end deliverable is, but the most learning you'll get is actually from how you work together to finish your work. But yeah, it was great. It was great. And I think I'm going to cherish those moments so much because I don't know when I'm going to be able to be in that type of scenario or situation again.
Exactly. And I'm wondering, like, for you personally, what did you learn about yourself? Like your self-awareness, in terms of maybe the way you work or about the way you lead or about anything else. I don't know. Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I think for me, there's things I knew about myself. I had gotten feedback from previous managers, etc. It's like I like to be in control and I like to take the lead. That's just something I naturally like to do. But also, so does the majority of the Insead population. I mean, I think if you got into a top program, you're going to naturally want to lead. So something I had to consciously do was to not speak as much and not step up as much, because like that's something I need to learn, right? So letting other people lead, letting other people take charge, and letting other people give their opinions before you give yours. So I think that was one of the very tactical things I did at every kind of group meeting is whenever we shared our ideas on an assignment, I just purposefully went last, just to give everyone else a chance to talk. And then if my things have already been said, then, I don't have so much to add. And I think that's something I'm going to be doing as I re-enter the working world, because it did wonders for me. Because I think my perception at work has always been like, type A go-getter, but at Insead, that's not necessarily the perception people had of me anymore, which was great.
No, it's really interesting. And something that I thought about when, you kind of bonded with that one American classmate you mentioned, because you guys were kind of similar among your groups, was thinking, gosh, like 10, 15, 20 years down the road, perhaps after your time at Bain, thinking about companies you might want to start or NGOs you might want to start. Like, how can you really seek out those people that, you would love to stay in touch with, decades down the road? Or is that just something that you have to kind of just accept that, okay, I think I met a lot of interesting people, at the beginning of the program, and I'm going to deepen my connection with them and we'll see what we do. But I could see that being like stressful in a weird way, because you have this period to meet so many talented people, but you're not going to be able to meet them all, right? I mean, you guys are changing campuses, you're coming in at different times. I mean, there could be like the perfect business partner for you, right? In another section, you'll just never meet her or him. So I'm wondering if you had a philosophy about that, or
honestly, that was part of like the FOMO you kind of have to get over with pretty fast. I mean, I knew classmates who would go for lunch with a different person almost every day of the week because their goal was to meet everyone.
Wow.
It's crazy, yeah. But at the end of it, it's like,
wow,
would I want to know everyone, not super well, but no one very well? Or the reverse, like you have, a group of 10 people that you know so well and are always going to be there for you. It's just one of those things you got to prioritize, and you'll always have access to this group of alums from your year, and you're going to keep running into them in cities all over the world, at reunions all over the world. And I think that the Insead experience doesn't just end when you're done with your time in Fontainebleau or Singapore. It keeps going. And I think if you have that mindset, it kind of pushes away that stress or that need to meet everyone, because that maybe in 10 years, you'll actually meet someone you never even knew you studied with. And then, that's how an opportunity kind of arises. Yeah. So that would be what I'd say.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about Outsead, actually, because could you talk a little bit more about like what the club does and what you got out of that whole experience leading that one student club?
Yeah, no, for sure. So Outsead basically runs a bunch of events throughout the year. So we have some that are more social, so just bringing either the whole student body together, or just the small group of us would go for drinks or have, board game night, something like that. So we'd run those like every month or every 2 months.
By the way,
So for example,
can I pause you? I love that you guys have board game nights.
Yeah.
That's that's just a highlight for me because what's better than playing board games? Okay, let's get that out of the way.
Exactly.
I mean, I seriously think it's like one of the best ways to like meet people, get to know people. And
you see the best in people and the worst in people sometimes during board games.
Exactly. You can really exactly.
So like some of the bigger events that we would have that would be social would be events around like Pride Week. So we did like a full week of activities on both campuses, France and Singapore, where we had like a storytelling event, a big party, something called applesauce, which is like an Insead tradition. It's basically like improv meets like PowerPoint. I won't spoil it too much, but all you Inseaders listening, you'll experience applesauce soon. So that would be like, the big kind of like social events we would run. Then we had events that were more recruiting focused.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. There are employers who are very interested in like amping up their diversity and inclusion recruiting and giving, women, LGBT, et cetera, more opportunities to network and meet the offices and also learn what it's like to be LGBT and work for Bain, McKinsey, et cetera. So we had those quite a few times a year. They could just be, drinks in Fontainebleau where they'll bring company representatives there to meet you. Or we went to Paris to go for dinner with folks from another firm. Or we'd also arrange like one-on-one phone calls or virtual coffee chats, we'd call them, with consultants from, your target office. So that was another benefit of being part of Outsead is the additional opportunities to learn about life as an LGBT in your firm and, what it's like to work there. And then the third type of event that we would have, or it would be around like conferences. So there's a lot of LGBT MBA conferences that happen all over the world. The biggest one is Reaching Out MBA. It's in the US. So a group of, I think of 8 of us flew to Minneapolis from Paris to go to the conference. I know a very odd location to fly from Paris.
Yes,
like to go to.
I can imagine.
But there's another one in London as well. So I think, the club had the right balance of, social education around LGBT issues, but also like, focusing on your needs within the Insead MBA and giving you chances to network and recruit, et cetera.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll be sure to link to that blog post you wrote for the Insead blog about bringing your whole self to Insead.
Perfect.
Yeah, and well, I have a couple more questions. One thing I did want to talk about is dating. Or how that works. How that works at a school, right? Like at Insead. I mean, is it what do I have? Like, did you find did you find that it was quite a big part of the experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of people dated, and at the very end of the program, I remember. So we did a grad trip in Croatia, and we'd all hang out and try to count like every couple that's still together in our class.
Yeah.
I think we got up to 30 couples out of a class of 500. So that was pretty crazy. So I think,
good stats.
So I think like, if you're not sure if you want to do an MBA, I think one reason is to find the love of your life. So I think that could happen. But no, I think dating is like pretty common in the program. I think like being gay, I mean, your pool is a lot smaller. So I didn't date any classmates. I feel like we're really delving into my personal life here. But I mean, you're close to Paris, or even when you're in Singapore, I mean, you can easily date as part of the program. And it's just one of these things that you prioritize, or you prioritize based on what you want to get out of your year.
Yeah. Okay. So there's 30 couples coming out of the
19J.
Yeah, 19J. Yeah, I know, because it's just something. I laugh about it, but I do think it's a big part of the MBA social experience, or having this amazing life experiences. Getting to meet all these other people, and it's something that no one really talks about, or writes about online, as an applicant. or maybe they do, and I just don't know where this stuff is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know it's a huge factor in the whole thing, and I don't really know what to ask about it, but I do want people to know, what it's like, and yeah, that's why I asked you.
Yeah, we actually, there's one more thing I'll add. I just remembered. So during our grad trip, or leading up to our grad trip, we had something called Insead, so like Tinder and Insead in one word. And you could pick like 10 people that you would like, and then one person you super like, and then you'd get like your matches sent to you via email. So it's like,
that's hilarious.
You'll always have your last chance at the end. Yeah, it's great.
Or your last chance or your last heartbreak, one of the two.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Massine, thank you so much for breaking down what you went through over the past 10 months, past year. I just wanted to give you the stage one last time to just share your takeaways at this stage, right? This is 2 to 3 months after the program has ended. You've taken this trip through Central America. You're kind of looking back at the whirlwind that was your Insead MBA, and you're about to start your new job. What did you really take away from the whole MBA experience?
Yeah, so I think what I took away is that it's not just 10 months, right? This is something that's going to keep going for the rest of your life. It's not like you graduate and all of a sudden you're cut off from all these people that you spend time with. I traveled this summer. I had a classmate join for part of it. But even throughout the summer, I'm still on the phone and keeping in touch with a lot of my classmates. We had a reunion in Toronto, for example, when I came back. So I'd say push aside that FOMO, enjoy the moment while you're there, and know that it's not actually 10 months. It's like a lifelong experience that you'll get with that class that you studied with. I'd say, that's probably the biggest learning there.
Yeah, I'm
shifting the mindset earlier on.
I love that. And was there something totally unexpected about the experience for you? That as an applicant you just would never have thought of? Or did it pretty much, go the way you thought it would?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I was surprised by, I mentioned it earlier, was people were not competitive in an unhealthy way. And you would think when you're all trying to go for the same jobs or the same opportunities that you would see the worst side of people. But generally my experience was so positive. And I think it just goes to show what the school culture is really like. So that was a really, really nice surprise. And it makes me feel proud to be an Insead alum now.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Massine, for coming back on the show. I think we'll end it there. And I wish you the best of luck with your new gig in Brussels with Bain. And I hope you don't do too much flying, or maybe you want to do a lot of flying. But I hope it's just a wonderful working experience for you coming up this year.
Thanks, Darren. It's great to be back on the show. And I'm looking forward to see what's next.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your #1 school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.